Hello, everyone, and welcome to One Tribe's webinar. The aim of our webinar is to address two of this year's key theme issues for COP28, which is Indigenous people and nature and land use. So our webinar is Indigenous Values in the Carbon Market, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here. Thank you for joining us. We'll start with a few introductions. So I'll introduce myself first. I'm Galia Orm. I head up One Tribe's projects and partnerships, and I also support our Indigenous-led sister company, One Tribe Indigenous Carbon, which is based in Canada. One Tribe is a climate action platform that helps businesses to decarbonize emissions and support the regeneration and restoration of nature-based solutions. And One Tribe Indigenous Carbon is an Indigenous-led carbon project development company working primarily with First Nations in Canada. So this webinar is in support of COP28, and we have a fantastic list of speakers that I'm really excited to introduce. First of all, I'd like to introduce Cy Standing. Cy is the former chief of Wahpeton Dakota Nation. He's the chairman of the board of directors of Tatanka Oyate Holdings, which is the Wahpeton Dakota Nation Development Company. So welcome, Cy. Chief Lorianne Whitecalf is the first woman to be elected chief of Sweetgrass Nation. She was elected for her 5th term in 2021. Chief Whitecalf practices a traditional lifestyle of hunting, fishing and gathering, and currently sits on the board of Saskatchewan Indian Institution of Technology. Welcome, Chief Laurie. Tina Rasmussen is our next speaker. She is the Chief Business Officer at MLTC Industrial Investments, the economic development arm of Meadow Lake Tribal Council. Tina sits on the board of the Beaver River Community Futures and is a certified professional economic developer for Saskatchewan and a certified technical Aboriginal economic developer. We also have Alan Laubsch. Alan is the founder of Generation Blue, a venture studio dedicated to planetary game changers powered by exponential technologies. And we also have with us Eric Wilburn, who is an independent consultant at the intersection of nature and climate, focusing on catalyzing market and non-market solutions to drive the just transition. And finally, my co-moderator, Milton Tutusis, Cascateo Masqua, which means black bear, will be moderating this webinar with me. Milton is a dedicated bridge builder and advocate for Indigenous causes and has been a key member of the Saskatoon Regional Economic Development Authority team since 2021. So welcome everyone again. And I will hand it over now to Milton to start off our questions and start off the webinar.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Galia, and Tawao, Tansik, Ntutim, Tiktam Skat na Gakyon. That's a basic general greeting in my native language, which is the Cree language here in Western Canada. I'm dialing in from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Treaty 6 territory and homeland of the Métis. So if you are looking for us on our map, a Canadian map, we are part of the Western Canadian prairies. So Tawao again is welcome to our space. And again, I come from the Poundmaker Cree Nation, just 2 hours west of the city of Saskatoon here in Canada, and really excited to be part of this webinar. I just want to start off by saying that we had our knowledge keeper, traditionalist, Mr. Cy Standing, who's part of our panel, did a prayer for us already. So normally in most of our business gatherings, we it's part of our custom to give greetings and thanks to the Creator for giving us another day, and also to thank our Mother Earth for nurturing us and providing the food and nourishment and all the things we need to even exist as human beings. So, but I'm going to hold off explaining the value system that most Indigenous cultures have around the world, still intact despite the centuries of colonialism and attempts to assimilate us into mainstream European cultures, we've still maintained our cultural ways and our worldview and our practices. But like I said, Sai Standing will explain a little deeper when we get to hear from him. So again, I just wanted to start off by saying that, and we have a few questions for our Indigenous panelists, and we've agreed that I would take the lead in terms of trying to facilitate this component. And I want to start off with maybe with Sai Standing. One of the common themes, of course, of this conference is Indigenous peoples, that would be us, and the nature and land use for COP28. And so the first question is, what can we learn from past practices related to resource extraction and development and apply those lessons into the voluntary carbon market? So I'll start with Sai Standing first.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. In our Dakota way, we always greet each other to first greeting is Mitaki Owasin. And Mitaki Owasin means all my relatives. And all my relatives includes every living creature on earth, the land, water, birds, the snakes. So it's an acknowledgement every time we get up to speak, that's where we address everyone on earth. That is my opening. Of course, in our spiritual and ways, the land is very important to our people. Well, of course, when we speak about land, we include water, we include air, we include all the living thing, the sun. It's all one. I know my grandmother used to say, you have to, you're brought up on this earth to take care of the land. And all our values and teachings go that way, is to take care of land and the animals and the birds, and not to be, and just take what you need from the earth. In our ways, the Dakota way especially, that land is not owned by one individual or corporations or whatever. We only borrow the land. We're only here for a very short time. So our job is to take care of the land and take care of the animals, the birds. That's our philosophy. That's our we say we chohan, our way of life, and we're to continue this way. But as everyone knows, in 1492, something happened, and colonization came into effect and destroyed most of our way of life. And they introduced Christianity and assimilation, and but we are able to continue and survive after over 500 years of colonization. And every First Nation I know of, they have traditional people, they have spiritual people. So I have hope that we can turn things around and save Mother Earth, and that's our goal. I just wanted to touch on some values that we have as Dakota people, and of course I'll say them in English because I don't think all of you understand Dakota. But anyway, the meanings are quite close, and that's fortitude, courage, or bravery, respect, and to have compassion and be kind, humility, be humble, and to have an oksape. It is to have wisdom, ability to make the right decisions, and of course, generosity, to be helpful, to give away your possessions. Those are the values and virtues that we have, and a lot of our people have forgotten them, or but I noticed that now that the younger generation, the university students, have gone back and tried to learn their values and the traditional and spiritual way of life, and I think that's very positive for me.
Thank you, Washday. Sai, thank you so much. We'll come back to you with other questions as well. So maybe we'll move on to this point in time. Chief Laurie Whitecalf, just to maybe summarize your experience with past practices related to resource extraction and development, and what lessons would we apply to this new space we're getting involved with called voluntary carbon markets? Laurie.
Good morning, and thank you, Milton. Thank you, Sai, for the prayer this morning. I'm calling in from Sweetgrass First Nation, Nakawitsi, as we call it. So my thoughts on past resource extraction. When our treaties were signed, I'm the direct descendant of Chief Strike Him on the Back, who signed treaty in Sweetgrass for Sweetgrass First Nation, and their idea was to share the land with our non First Nation neighbors, I guess, that moved in. A lot of the resources in the past, even within the boundaries of Sweetgrass, were extracted with no remediation plan. So we have basically holes in the ground, holes in Mother Earth, where aggregate was taken for the building of the provincial highways, and those holes still remain. And I know a lot of the teachings that our elder Sai mentioned are echoed in Sweetgrass as well, in the Cree value system. And like Sai said, Wakutu in relations, that includes our four-leggeds, our birds, our fish, even the rocks. Like I remember teachings as kids throwing rocks and getting told by elders why not to throw rocks. When I hunt or fish or gather medicines or gather berries and natural vegetables from the earth, to always return and be thankful. Offer tobacco, say your prayer, and thank Creator. If we don't do that, we were taught our Creator would stop producing and providing for us. So that was really important. That was a really important lesson. We need to be more conscious, I guess, and be heard. I mean, that was in the late 50s when a lot of the gravel was extracted from Sweetgrass by the provincial governments. At that time, First Nations were not even allowed to hire lawyers. So it was really challenging for them at the time, and there was a language barrier. But now we have our own lawyers in our own nations, and we have a lot of our own experts out there who can help us deal with industry and also governments to make sure that we repatriate the land and leave it as it is, bring it back to as close to as we can to natural prairie, I guess, and the natural lands for our future generations. Oksama, thank you.
Hey, thank you there, Chief Laurie. Tina Rasmussen comes to us, joins us from, I should say, northwestern Saskatchewan, which is in the, I guess, the beginning of the boreal forest, right? That stretches across most of Canada. So maybe, Tina, you've been very involved in industrial developments since I've known you. So maybe you can share with us some your experience regarding resource extraction and what we can learn heading into this new era of voluntary carbon markets. Tina?
I think Chief Laurie and Sai have done a very good job of talking about the role of Indigenous people in resource, the care, our responsibility to the land. Having been involved in resource development for quite a number of years, Meadow Lake Tribal Council is very well known across the world for actually owning a very large sawmill, you know, and many people will go, oh my goodness, you know, we're cutting down the trees. Trees are a natural resource, yes. Trees are a requirement for our people. Those of us that live in the north, we hunt, we trap, we fish, we need our animals, our plants, our medicines. We all need those trees. So one of the things that we do need as Indigenous people, though, is the Truth and Reconciliation Recommendation number 92, which was the right to economic development. Our people were forced to remain on reserves, forced to not be part of the economy of our country, of our world, of our province. And that's changing so much. So many people in our area, in all of our areas, want to be involved in economic development. In the past, Milton asked a question about large industrial companies. Those companies came in, they extracted the resources, and they left with them. They drove right by our communities with the uranium on the back of the trucks, with the logs on the back of the trucks, with the gravel on the inside their trucks. And there was no discussion, there was no talking about how Indigenous people need to be involved and participate in that economic development. And that is now changing. And this is the experience of the Meadow Lake Tribal Council, of how, for us, it's a 40-year story of how that has changed. Milton mentioned, I'm a member of the Flying Dust First Nation. We live in northwestern Saskatchewan. We're part of the boreal forest. Forestry is our economic development opportunity. And every Indigenous community has to use what it has in their backyard. We aren't going to just pick up everything and move away from where our homes are. We have to try and use the resources, but at the same time, we have the knowledge and we have the people like Sai in our communities that can help us to balance how we use those resources in order so that they're still there for our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. We don't think in our minds, when we're planning and organizing, we don't think 5 years, 6 years, 7 years down the road, where are we going to be? How is it going to be? We think generations from now. How is it going to be? And at the Meadow Lake Tribal Council, we've been very successful with our forest management. We've been able to successfully do economic development. We've created a great amount of job opportunities for people, for Indigenous people in our area. 70% of the people that work in forestry in our traditional territory are Indigenous. But that took 40 years and 40 years of hard work, and sometimes saying no to the dollar and going ahead and worrying more about the people and about the land. So not always what we see with industry. We've seen a lot of industry, a lot of forestry people come into the area, they cut and they cut and they cut and they cut, and they don't speak to anybody. They don't talk to the communities. They don't ask about the traditional spaces or the animals or the medicines. And they're damaging, you know, and we've got to begin to work better with industry. I think they're finally starting to hear, and our governments are finally starting to listen to the Indigenous people, that we know how to do this. Our elders have done this for many years. We all grow up with that responsibility in our heads, you know, and that we can help to do this. And now industry is beginning to ask those questions. They're beginning to listen to the Indigenous communities. And I think our provincial governments are beginning to offer more responsibility to the nations to control those land bases. So that helps those industries that don't want to listen. We can force them into listening if they want to use our resources. And we can also force them into allowing us to participate in the economic reconciliation piece as well, if we have access to those resources that are on our ancestral lands.
Mm-hmm. Hi. Thank you so much for that, Tina. I wish we had more time to dive into the history of the development of Western Canada, in particular our region here in the Northwest. It used to be called the Northwest Territory. What happened in 1885, the Northwest Resistance, and then, of course, the incorporation of the Indian Act, some legislation and policies that we never had any say and input in. And lo and behold, we got put on Indian reserves and told we couldn't participate and to sit on the sidelines. Well, we're no longer on the sidelines, or road allowances for the Métis, for example. We are now fully engaged thanks to some, I think, success in the courts as well, right, Tina? We've had some success in the courts in the last 25 years, so we're now, the table is starting to turn. So, but I want to get back to Chief Laurie here with a question regarding the challenges. We've got a lot of challenges in our communities as well. Despite the positive trend, good developments, industrial developments, our GDP is probably on the rise. It's safe to say that across Canada. But what, as a Nogemau, as a chief in your community, what are the greatest challenges that you think we would have as an Indigenous population, and in terms of participating in the voluntary carbon market?
Thank you, Milton, for that question. I've been serving as chief for 10 years, and I think one of the biggest challenges for myself and the team, the leadership team in Sweetgrass, it's never the membership. The membership want to participate. They want to capture whatever opportunities are out there. They want to, of course, within our teachings, right? Like we want to go forward, marrying our traditional beliefs with the present day economy. One of the main stumbling blocks we faced is the jurisdictional issues within the province and the federal government, and the Indian Act as well. I mean, we just as an example, we were gonna do some work on aggregate. We found very rich gravel sources right along the Battle River. When we found the first, we got it tested. The company that came out and did the testing said they had never found that rich of gravel straight out of the ground. The overburden was very shallow. Grand opportunity. It's still sitting there because of the policies that we had no part of creating, the policies that were mandated on us by the government of Canada. And the province was, I'll say, easier to work with. We worked with them. So our biggest challenge is, and the other thing is providing leverage for financing, because our land is all Crown land, right? We can have the best ideas, but I know the banks and the financial institutions are now coming around and learning to help us access financial instruments so we can proceed with good economic, because if we had a good business in Sweetgrass, become a good economic partner, say that aggregate, we had talks with the RMs, surrounding reserves, industry, like we've got this very rich source of gravel. How can we work with you? They were all willing to work with us, but it was Indigenous Services Canada that keeps putting the roadblocks in front of us, saying, well, you need to do this, you need to do this. So that's the biggest challenge for me as chief, is working with the different levels of government and the roadblocks they put in front of us. Oksama, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Switching gears, Tina, there's a question here. I'd like to direct this to you. In terms of consent to participate in economic development, what would be What would that mean to you in your community in the northwest part of Saskatchewan in terms of consultation? And how important is it, considering at times wish we had more time to explain our electoral governance systems, because sometimes there's change in leadership and from community to community, and it's often said industry or corporations, investors want some certainty, right? So how would you explain to the audience this notion of getting consent and consultation with that challenge that we have in many of our communities? So maybe Tina, if you understand my question, I kind of rambled on there. So
yeah, you bet. Yeah, and I think for many nations, and probably a lot of Métis communities as well, they'd say that doesn't happen. The provincial government in Saskatchewan, or any provincial government, has a duty, what they call a duty to consult. So anytime an industrial business or something that impacts the land and the air and the water and the birds, the animals, they want to do something. They want to extract resources. They have to do what they say, duty to consult. So any of the people that use the land, they have to ask them, how does this impact you? What do you feel about it? What do you think about it? But the form that takes is basically a letter that comes out that's addressed to our poor chiefs who get, millions of these things tossed at them. They've got to do all the social programming and all of everything for their reserves. And on top of that, these industries are sending them letters. What do you think about this? Or walk into a band meeting and bring a stack of literature and documents that say, look, trust what we're going to do. We're not going to harm the water. We're not going to harm the environment. We're not going to do all of this. Set it on your desk and expect you to have the capacity to understand your community, to have the capacity to understand what it's being shown, what it's being asked, and what it's being told. Well, first and foremost, most of us that are on our nations are not scientists. We don't know what these documents are saying. And most of us couldn't possibly read all of that stuff and understand all of that stuff in the 30-day time limit that they give us to respond. So what happens is a lot of times these things sit on the desk of a nation and they don't get responded to. So the response of government is, and the response of the industry that's looking at doing the development is, we consulted, we tried, no response, mustn't be any concerns. And away we go, right? So then public policy or provincial policy, the policies of the Ministry of Environment are what guides, not the policies or the learnings or the understandings of the Indigenous people that live on that land, that make use of that land. That's not seen anywhere in that document. So our public consultation processes in this province and every province basically do not take into account Indigenous knowledge and don't see its value and see its importance. And there's no understanding that, it's an easy excuse to say, well, we'll just go ahead and just bombard them with information because I know nobody's going to get it and then it's going to go through. And we're not going to have to listen to all that because we did our engagement. And thank goodness that's really starting to change. And many of the nations are standing up and just putting a stop and saying, that's not good enough. No, you're not going to have access to our land. And no, we're not just going to take the 30 days. We need to seriously look at what this development is doing and how the Indigenous people play a piece in that development. So consent to participate, very, very big difference between maybe what our governments and industry think and what our Indigenous people actually think consent to participate is. Consent to participate, you don't need to be afraid that Indigenous communities are going to try and, if we let them understand it, they're just going to put a stop to everything. If it's wrong and it's going to hurt the earth, you're darn right we're going to put a stop to everything. But if it's good for us and there's a way for us to do it, and we can see no harm to the land and we can see economic development, we want to participate.
Mm-hmm. In other words, I think I've heard Tina and the rest of the panel sometimes there's a perception that all Indigenous peoples are against development, but it could be quite the contrary. We're not against development is a quote I've heard time and time again, but if we are going to engage in development, it'll be on our terms, not industry terms, right? So I think it's really, really changed that way. So, um, Chief Laurie, what are some of the, from your experience, the major legal or policy obstacles that your community is facing specific to land use? Maybe you might want to emphasize something you've said maybe earlier or something new. So, Chief Laurie?
Thank you again, Melton. I guess obstacles in, well, even just developing policy is, like Tina said earlier, you need to have everybody well informed, right? So you don't want to give them, you don't want to give membership 200-page documents, right? You want to give them information. Like, for instance, I'll just give an example. We're working on a land use policy in Sweetgrass right now, and one of that, a majority of our land is cultivated acres. We have one or two, I think we have 2 First Nation farmers. The rest are non-First Nations. But sitting with the farmers and talking to them about spraying, application of insecticides and pesticides, right? A lot of them use helicopters and airplanes now because it's cheaper for them, and it's also it's more efficient. However, our elders don't want that, right? So that was one of the meetings we conducted, the first meeting last spring with the farmers and the elders and the community members. And with our non-First Nation friends, it was more about economics. So if we stop spraying with the planes and the helicopters, what are we going to get in return? They don't understand that they're already receiving a favor by allowing them onto our nation, right? To make their living, right? I guess that's one of the main obstacles for me is having non-First Nation business, farmers, any kind of producers, levels of government recognize Sweetgrass First Nation as a sovereign nation, to recognize us as a government, right? And that's been inherited by the present leadership over the years, right? Where I'll say the general public, the general population over the years diminished, slowly chipped away at our rights. Not so much rights, but our stature, I guess, in that. So I think you said it earlier, Milton, we have to recapture that. We have to recapture that, and we do have that. Our elders say, you young people are lucky now. When we were in leadership, we didn't speak English language. We had that language barrier. We didn't often understand. We weren't able to interpret our Cree words into the English language. They call us kids. I have white hair, but they still call me a kid. They say you kids have it easier now because you can speak on their level, right? So I would say that's the biggest challenge, is being recognized as a government and being respected as a government. Exama, thank you.
Hey, thank you. So in a nutshell, I think what we heard is Indigenous peoples in this country have come from a state where they were, I like to say, self-sufficient intertribal sovereign trading nations. They took care of themselves 110%. It's only since 1492, as former Chief Cy Standing said, that things have changed, and we call it the disruption of our economies, our culture, our lifestyle, and disruption, and a lot of destruction of our lands and resources. We know in Saskatchewan here, this is the heartland of the prairie, the grain and crops economy, the cereal crops, for example. We are the center of that in Western Canada, and we're running out of water, arable land and water. And science has proven that as well. So it's, I guess, what the leadership here is saying, and is that had the newcomers listened to the advice of our elders and our teachings and our ways, our worldview, and our value system, we may not have this problem had they listened and slowed down a little bit, because not all development is positive. There are repercussions to rapid development. And I think one of the panelists was saying that we come from a culture of long-term planning. We are planners. Long-term planning. We're often taught of 7 generations, like to think 7 generations ahead. What are you doing today that'll impact that 7th generation? So I think we're all trying to come to grips now with this challenge we have globally, including here in our own backyard here in Saskatchewan, Western Canada. So again, I wish we had more time. We could dive deeper into the issues and the experiences we've had here in Western Canada, and I think they're quite similar across Canada, because the policies that were enforced upon our peoples here in what is now present-day Saskatchewan has been applied across all of Canada as well, because of what happened here in 1885, what we call the Northwest Resistance. So anyhow, there's more to it than that, but I think because of time, I'm going to thank the panelists at this time for taking part and participating. You're all very busy with your current responsibilities. So with that, get that tamskat na wow, wash day, how kuda? No, that's a greetings. I think we say anyway. Correct me, Sai, but I think we say wash day, wash day. And thank you so much for your participation. So I'm gonna turn it over now to Galia to take over for part 2 of our panel discussion. Galia?
Thank you, Milton. Thank you, everyone. Yes, so we want to hope you stick around, because we'd like to connect everyone on this webinar and bring in some business voices as well. And so for our business expert panelists, I have the questions are for both of you, really, Alan and Eric. So if I can maybe start with Alan, and then same question for Eric. I think one of the things that we're recognizing is the barrier to participation is often an investment, particularly an investment in Indigenous-led projects. So what criteria do your companies use to decide on investing in or supporting Indigenous-led environmental projects specifically? So Alan?
Sure. Thank you very much, Galia, and truly honored to be here in this panel with such deep care for the earth and such wisdom. So thank you. In terms of the carbon projects that we tend to support, would be projects with high levels of co-benefit, because we think that carbon is just literally the tip of the iceberg. We want to make sure that whatever carbon is being sequestered has positive co-benefits. So these are not just monoculture rubber trees being planted, for example, that destroy an existing ecosystem just because you can get more carbon from the rubber plantation or eucalyptus. So biodiversity and water cycles are really, really vital. And that's so important to understand that while we need to reduce the carbon in the atmosphere, the way that we do that the most effectively is actually through taking care of our water cycles, which naturally produces the carbon that we need. So the larger ecosystem service benefits are vital. And then, of course, the community dimension, right? We've all been shocked by how some of the larger players have really cut out the Indigenous communities. There have been $100 million projects where communities have received a few 100,000 of those benefits. So there's a lot of greed in that market. And one of the things that we make sure is that a large percentage of the benefits go to the community. So when we look at projects, we aim for returns that compensate investors in a fair way, and which leave half of the net benefits at least invested into local development as well. So those are the kind of the main dimensions. So there's the carbon aspect of it. We want to have a project that's well designed, where it's part of an integrated process that takes care of the entire ecosystem, especially the water cycle and biodiversity. And the third aspect would be the community impact.
Yes, Eric, same question to you in terms of investment. So what criteria would you use to decide on?
Great, thank you. And yeah, great to be here and calling in from the unceded territory of the Massapequa peoples in Long Island, New York. To be very clear, I have never been working for a company that's invested directly into projects. I always have played the translator role. So during my time in Mozambique at Gorongosa National Park, I was working with about 200,000 smallholder farmers across, we probably had 30 or 40 different chiefdoms, if you want to call it that. And we were trying to work with investors to get money into those projects. And I think in terms of criteria, most of the investors that are looking at these markets today are institutional investors that are looking for market rate returns. And right now, call it a commodity. I don't think carbon can or should be commoditized, but what they're paying for is a climate mitigation outcome, right? A carbon credit. And so I think a lot of the challenge that we see in a lot of these projects is I personally grew up in the Pacific Northwest, where Indigenous knowledge and culture is still quite strong, even at public elementary schools. And we were taught about the salmon and the importance of biodiversity and the freshwater cycle, as Alan mentioned, and all these other critical ecosystem services. And right now, a lot of these projects are only being valued for their carbon. And that's a big issue, because most of these projects, they're actually protecting critical watersheds, which as climate change gets worse, that's going to be the first thing that we feel. They're protecting kind of key pollination, pollinators that are critical for sustaining our food systems. But none of those, services that these projects are providing, protecting and restoring natural ecosystems, are actually getting valued, are actually getting compensated. And so when you look at the overall financial model of these projects, and you look at the amount of money that has to go back to investors, given where the price of carbon is today, a lot of these projects don't even pencil. They're not financially viable. And to make them financially pencil, if you're in, an indigenous or community, or smallholder farmer or, whatever landowner on the ground, you have to actually give up a lot of that revenue back to the investor in order to get in the money that you need up front to make that project go. And so a lot of this to me is, this is the evolution of our economic system to actually, build value and compensation for a lot of these ecosystem services, for which carbon is one, back into our economic system. But we've got a long way to go on that front. But it's exciting. We're doing it with carbon, which gives me faith. We can do it with water, biodiversity, pollinators, nutrient availability, all these other pieces.
Brilliant, thank you. So we've got our second question is about policies. Which policies, what specific policies or corporate commitments would most effectively enable businesses to support and include Indigenous-led projects? I know you've kind of answered that with both your questions, but if you can expand a bit more on that, that would be great. Shall we start with Eric now? We'll go back.
I'm a total policy wonk. I come from a family of policy people. My dad spent 40 years working for the state of Washington. He led the writing of the cap and trade law. And so this is something where I think it's severely undervalued, the role of policy and policy entrepreneurship in this whole space. And I think there's I'll say a couple of levels. which one is what I just spoke to before, which is continuing to make sure that we are creating mechanisms to make people pay for, ecosystem services, of which carbon sequestration is one. And so a lot of that lies within the federal government, but it can be provincial, it can even be local. Cities can say, well, we want to create a model whereby we are paying a higher utility bill so that we can restore forests in a key watershed so that we have lower sedimentation and therefore better water quality and lower treatment costs. So, kind of really building into our economic system the value of nature, but very acutely within carbon projects. I've spent so much time in the middle because I worked on projects all across Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia. And there are so many groups that are, it's so interesting, hearing Chief Lori Whitecalf, former Chief Site Standing, and Tina talk about their experience, because I've worked with so many groups that they don't speak English, that their financial literacy is nowhere near where it needs to be to actually engage in these projects. And yet they're being approached by project developers that are saying, hey, we'll give you $100,000 today if you sign this piece of paper, but it might be $100 million project. And so one of the kind of critical policy pieces is that there is a process that is required that is not, that is actually defined, because people generally say FPIC, free, prior, and informed consent, but that can mean a lot of different things. And I think one of the actual critical pieces that I think we need across the industry is we need a third-party legal and financial representative for all community and Indigenous parties in every single carbon transaction. And I think that needs to be paid for by the certifying body. So, the Integrity Council on Voluntary Carbon Markets, which has been formed to oversee all the different standards, they have a working group that's focused on Indigenous peoples and local communities. This is one kind of suggestion that I'm strongly recommending, is that they require, for example, Verra, which is one of the leading carbon certifiers, to actually take a portion of their proceeds when they have a project certified, put that into a fund that exclusively exists to fund third-party representation for Indigenous communities. So I think that's one very critical piece that could be implemented quite quickly to make sure that communities are informed and are making the most of these opportunities from an economic development standpoint.
Yeah, I think that's a really great recommendation. Really, yeah, I think that's an amazing idea that should be implemented. Absolutely. Alan, your thoughts on that?
Sure. So yeah, first of all, very much agree with what Eric raised as points. We can't continue to allow companies to pollute our earth without paying for the damage, right? That's, we essentially have an economy that doesn't include earth. So what our mission is at Gen Blue is to create an earth positive economy, one where we leave the earth better. So whether it's the pollution of our air, our water, our soil, we need to, we can't treat those as externalities. We have to price them. So we need to make more progress on having global carbon taxing, carbon pricing. Countries that have implemented these carbon taxes and then given companies the opportunity to offset that with carbon credits have seen a large uptake in carbon. We also need to think globally, right? So we need to recognize that there's some very, very, there are the most effective stewards of our natural spaces are Indigenous communities from around the world, whether it's from the Amazon all the way to Canada, and we should be able to to encourage companies to buy very high quality credits from around the world, as opposed to having to choose only local kinds of projects. So global perspective matters, in terms of other policy guidelines that are being quite having an impact is disclosure around the impact on biodiversity and deforestation, which is happening very strongly in Europe, so that companies need to start to prove the transparency around their supply chain. Is that chocolate that you're selling deforestation free? If it's not, you can't sell that in Europe anymore, right? And a lot of the problems that we see in this society is that we've commodified everything, so that we think chocolate is just chocolate, but there's shade-grown chocolate that protects rainforests, and there's deforestation chocolate, which has deforested some entire countries. So we really need to start to get more transparency and have these policies that don't allow companies to hide their impact anymore.
Excellent. Yeah, absolutely. I come from the chocolate world, so I know very, straight hand what it's like to grow ethical and sustainable chocolate, and how much devastation, exploitation is in the cocoa farming and coffee farming world. So yeah, it's key. It's key to raise this awareness and to ensure that the policies are in place so that those polluting the most are paying, as well as the respect and availability of information in the language that the Indigenous peoples speak and understand, and have that level of engagement that is respectful and direct and benefits all parties. I think, we've been looking, particularly as One Tribe Indigenous Carbon, at decolonializing the carbon market, or making it much more democratic and open for participation, and removing barriers to participation. So really appreciate that input. Milton, have you any thoughts on your conclusions on the discussion today and the input from everyone?
No, other than that I'm still learning about this industry, and really appreciate the time your experts have spent with us this morning. And other than just reiterating that, the experience Indigenous peoples have had in North America since 1492 hasn't all been beneficial in more ways than one. And the truth is finally coming out because of the exposure of the Indian residential school experience, for example. And yeah, just encourage the listeners to understand, do more research, learn more about us, read the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, read the calls to action, especially call to action number 92. And lastly, respect, pay respect. We need respect. We need more respect for not only us as a people, but over our ancestral lands and territories, because we are in a crisis. And inclusion's the word. Equity, ownership. I think Tina and Chief there would agree that we're not just asking for participation in terms of jobs and a few contracts, for example, on the ground, but we want to. Indigenous leaders are now demanding that we have some equity ownership, because when you own something, you also take more responsibility, etc., for that asset, right? So I think this applies to this industry as well. So with that, that's all I had to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Milton. Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate your time, and yeah, look forward to continuing the conversations as well. So thank you so much.